Hello and welcome back to the History of the Mongols. I'm your host Kyle. Today we'll explore the final years and ultimate collapse of the Jurchen-ruled Jin Dynasty, marking the conclusion of the Mongols' two-decade conquest of northern China. This critical victory established the groundwork for the subsequent Mongol campaign against the powerful southern Song dynasty, setting the stage for the eventual Mongol rule over the entirety of China. We've previously discussed the early phases of the Mongol-Jin War, but let's briefly recap. In 1211, Genghis Khan launched an invasion of the Jin Empire. The Jin, under Jurchen rule from their homeland in Manchuria, were initially renowned for their formidable military strength, particularly their heavy cavalry and horse archers. However, by the 13th century, after nearly 100 years ruling China north of the Huai River, the once semi-nomadic Jurchen had adopted many aspects of Chinese culture and administration. This cultural assimilation weakened their military effectiveness significantly. As a result, Mongol forces consistently outmaneuvered and defeated Jin armies in open battle. The formerly formidable Jurchen military had largely transitioned into a predominantly Chinese infantry force, losing their advantage in cavalry warfare due to restricted access to horse-producing regions. Furthermore, early defections of Jin soldiers to the Mongol side brought crucial knowledge of Chinese siege tactics and weaponry, enabling the Mongols to systematically conquer northern China's fortified cities. In 1215, Emperor Aizong of Jin was forced to abandon the capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, and retreated southward across the Yellow River, severing ties with his ancestral Manchurian homeland. Although the Jin emperors remained ethnically Jurchen, by this point their governance and lifestyles had become indistinguishable from their Chinese subjects. Genghis Khan, however, offered no reprieve, leaving his trusted general Mukhali to maintain relentless pressure on the Jin Empire, even when he turned his own attention westward to confront the Khwarezmian Empire in 1219. Only with Mukhali's death in 1223 did the Jin dynasty experience a brief respite as Mongol military pressure temporarily eased. Between 1215 and 1223, the Jin dynasty found itself under continuous threat. In addition to Mongol assaults from the north, they faced betrayal from their former vassals, the Tangut-ruled Xixia kingdom, who allied themselves with the Mongols. To the east, the Jin lost control of the strategic Shandong Peninsula and its coastal regions to local rebellions, collectively known as the Red Coats. This loosely organised coalition of warlords, some aligned with the Mongols, others with the southern Song, all opposed Jin authority. Meanwhile, the Song dynasty, ruling southern China from below the Huai River, observed the Jin's weakening state with satisfaction, holding long-standing grudges from earlier Jin conquests and the loss of northern territories and two emperors in the early 12th century. Despite their increasingly desperate military situation, in 1217, the Jin surprisingly launched an invasion against the Song dynasty, intending to carve out additional territory as a strategic buffer against the advancing Mongols. However, this campaign achieved little beyond further draining Jin resources, concluding indecisively in 1221 after significant loss of lives and material. An unexpected turning point occurred between 1223 and 1224. Following Mukhali's death, Mongol military operations in northern China scaled back notably. Though Mukhali's son and brother attempted to continue the campaign, they lacked the critical support of Tangut forces, which had withdrawn following Mukhali's death. Additionally, Genghis Khan was occupied with his return journey from Central Asia, giving northern China a brief but crucial opportunity to regroup. In early 1224, Emperor Aizong of Jin passed away, succeeded by his third son, Ningjiasu, better known by his chosen Chinese name, Wanyan Shuxi, with Wanyan signifying the Jurchen royal clan. Ningjiasu inherited an empire weakened by decades of conflict and internal strife, now tasked with preparing for what would become the final chapters in the dynasty's turbulent history. At 25 years old, Ningjiasu, who took the throne as Emperor Aizong of Jin, represented perhaps the last chance for capable leadership in the Jin dynasty since the death of Shizong in 1189. Unlike his immediate predecessors, Xuanzong, who was somewhat erratic, and Wei Xiaowang, notorious for his incompetence, Aizong demonstrated greater fairness, caution, and capability. Had his reign occurred in less turbulent times, Aizong might have been remembered positively. Unfortunately, his leadership coincided with the dynasty's final collapse, culminating tragically with his death mere hours before the fall of his empire. In traditional Chinese dynasties, rulers adopted era titles during their reigns and received posthumous temple names upon their deaths. Ningjiasu's father, known as Wudubu during his lifetime, was posthumously titled Xuanzong of Jin. His predecessor was so despised, he was demoted after death from emperor to prince, becoming known as Wei Xiaowang, or Prince of Wei. Aizong, Ningjiasu's posthumous temple name, translates poignantly as pitiable ancestor, a reflection of his tragic circumstances. Additionally, his personal Chinese name, Shu Shu, was mockingly twisted by the Mongols into little slave, underscoring the humiliation of his dynasty's defeat. Initially, Emperor Aizong's rule showed promise. Coincidentally, both the Tangut and Song emperors died around the same time as Aizong's ascension, presenting an opportunity to establish peaceful relations. Although these diplomatic overtures did not lead to direct military alliances, they allowed Aizong to redistribute forces effectively against the ongoing threats posed by the Mongols and the rebellious Redcoats. Additionally, trade with the Tangut resumed, providing the Jin with badly needed horses. In a further attempt at diplomacy, Aizong dispatched envoys carrying formal condolences to the Mongols following the death of Genghis Khan, but they were brusquely turned away. This brief diplomatic respite allowed the Jin forces to reclaim some territory and bolster defences. Strategically, the Jin had moved their capital from Zhongdu to Kaifeng in 1215, a controversial decision by Emperor Xuanzong, but one that was not entirely without merit. Kaifeng, located in the central Henan province, had historically served as the Song capital before its capture by the Jurchen in the early 12th century. The city boasted impressive fortifications, a large population, and rich surrounding agricultural lands, making it difficult to besiege. Unlike Zhongdu, located relatively close to the Mongol heartland, Kaifeng was strategically shielded by the formidable barrier of the Yellow River, which could only be crossed at specific, heavily defended points. Direct crossings risked significant casualties, encouraging the Mongols to circumvent the river further west, where the terrain became mountainous and easily defensible. In the west, the fortress of Tongguan guarded the critical route connecting Shanxi and Henan provinces. Tongguan, with its mountainous defences and strong garrison, posed a significant obstacle to any Mongol advance. To bypass Tongguan, Mongol forces would have needed to march through territory controlled by the now neutral southern Song dynasty. This strategic dilemma was reportedly anticipated by Genghis Khan, who advised his successors to seek passage through Song territory. However, given the recent peace established between Jin and Song, such a move was uncertain. This complex geopolitical landscape greeted Ögedei when he ascended to the Mongol throne in 1229. Ögedei, lacking the battlefield reputation of his father and brothers, faced immediate pressure to demonstrate his leadership credentials by completing the conquest of the Jin. The Jin had grown bolder during the years without significant Mongol attacks, reclaiming cities and winning smaller engagements. Thus, Ögedei launched a preliminary campaign shortly after becoming Khan, dispatching an 8,000-strong army led by Dokulk into Shanxi province in late 1229. This force besieged Qingyangfu, prompting a Jin diplomatic mission for peace, which the Mongols rejected. In response, the Jin mobilized a relief force under the commander Pua, whose vanguard comprised the elite Loyal and Filial Army. Pua had gained notoriety over previous years by conducting raids into Mongol-controlled regions, capturing horses and supplies before retreating swiftly. His ability to inflate minor skirmishes into perceived major victories gave him a reputation, perhaps undeserved, as a skilled Mongol adversary. The Loyal and Filial Army itself had a dubious reputation, yet remained effective, comprising defectors and captives from Mongol forces, including northern Chinese, Uyghurs, Naimans, Tanguts, and even Kipchaks. These troops specialized in Mongol-style mounted warfare. Paid triple the standard military salary to incentivize defections from the Mongols, by the 1230s, this force numbered approximately 7,000 elite soldiers, though notorious for their unruly behavior and prowess in pillaging. Their vanguard, 1,000 strong, was led by Chen Heshang, one of Pu'er's commanders. At the Battle of Dachangyuan in early 1230, Pu'er successfully confronted Dokulk's forces, achieving the first significant Jin victory against the Mongols in nearly 2 decades of war. Emboldened by this success, Pu'er sent a provocative message to Ögedei, daring the Mongol ruler to challenge him further. Shortly thereafter, Pu'er, Chen Heshang, and another Jin commander named Hada decisively defeated another Mongol army near Caizhou. Ögedei was both angered and alarmed by these developments. Dokulk was swiftly removed from his command and possibly poisoned, reflecting the seriousness of Ögedei's reaction. Pu'er's defiant challenge, followed by actual battlefield victories by the Jin, coupled with the newly established peace between Jin and Song, deeply unsettled the new Khan. Within his own court, critics murmured doubts, suggesting that his younger, more militaristic brother Tolui would have been a better choice as Khan. These whispers implied that recent events were signs of divine disapproval. Ögedei attempted to dismiss these concerns by comparing the Jin's resurgence to a candle flaring briefly before being extinguished. Yet simultaneously, he began mobilizing a massive army to personally lead against the Jin. The historical records concerning this campaign are frequently contradictory, likely due to later historians intentionally obscuring Mongol defeats. In early 1231, Ögedei embarked on his campaign after 9 days of prayer to eternal blue heaven for victory. Facing substantial obstacles, the formidable Yellow River to the north, a neutral Song Dynasty border to the south, and the heavily fortified Tongguan Pass to the west, Ögedei decided to direct his full military might against Tongguan, aiming either to seize or circumvent this strategic stronghold. His army, numbering around 100,000 troops, included his brother Tolui, the renowned general Subutai, recently recalled from operations on the western steppe, as well as Mongols, Khitans, Uyghurs, and Chinese subjects. They advanced into Shanxi province, which was already struggling under severe famine conditions. The sheer size of this force necessitated rapid success to avoid exhausting local resources. Jin commanders Pu'er and Hada strategically withdrew their forces from Shanxi, reinforcing Tongguan to effectively withstand the impending Mongol assault. It soon became evident that directly storming the fortress would prove costly and protracted. Ögedei's adopted brother, Shigi Kutuk, attempted a classic Mongol maneuver, a feigned retreat, to lure the Jin defenders out of their fortified positions. However, the Jin troops refused to be drawn into open battle, resulting in significant Mongol casualties. Meanwhile, Subutai found an alternate route through the hills south of Tongguan, attempting to outmaneuver the fortress defenders. Unfortunately, his forces became dangerously overextended during the arduous march. Exploiting this vulnerability, Chen Heshang and 1,000 elite loyal and filial troops launched a successful counterattack at Daohuigu, dealing Subutai a notable defeat. Subutai retreated, chastened, to Ögedei's main camp, where the Khan, infuriated by this setback, threatened to strip him entirely of command, restrained only by Tolui's intercession. Forced to abandon his immediate objectives against Tongguan, Ögedei redirected his forces to besiege the sizable city of Fengxiangfu. In May 1231, the city finally fell after sustained bombardment, with 400 catapults concentrating fire on a vulnerable section of the city walls. Despite this hard-won success, Ögedei's frustration remained evident. He bitterly chastised his commanders, reportedly exclaiming, "If Mukali were alive, I would not have had to come here myself. Struggling to sustain the large army in famine-stricken Shanxi, Ögedei ordered a strategic withdrawal to Inner Mongolia during the summer of 1231 to reconsider their plans. While regrouping, Tolui presented a bold strategy that their father, Genghis, had contemplated in his final days, bypassing Tongguan by moving through Song Dynasty territory, thus positioning Mongol forces deep behind Jin lines. Ögedei accepted this plan, assigning Tolui and the renowned general Subutai to execute this ambitious maneuver with their respective tumans. Meanwhile, Ögedei planned to cross the Yellow River with the main army, while a smaller contingent under Jurchen Jin was dispatched toward the river's eastern end in Shandong to safeguard Ögedei's flank from potential encirclement. The strategy envisioned these forces operating as a giant pincer, converging simultaneously on Kaifeng from the north and southwest. Tolui's flanking action aimed to prevent the Jin from consolidating their defences against a single Mongol force. However, from the outset, the plan encountered significant difficulties. Ögedei's primary army became stalled at the siege of Hezhongfu while attempting to cross the Yellow River. Early indications suggested that the southern Song dynasty would not cooperate with Tolui's movement through their lands. By early 1231, the Song had already executed Li Quan, the Mongols' ally among the Redcoats in Shandong, and an envoy sent to negotiate safe passage through Song territory had mysteriously vanished. Advancing into Song territory without explicit permission risked encountering military resistance, potentially preventing Tolui's forces from rendezvousing with Ögedei and leaving his brother dangerously isolated. Moreover, much of Tolui's force had already experienced severe hardship in famine-ravaged Shanxi, or had spent the summer of 1231 in the barren Qinling Mountains, areas lacking sufficient resources for such a sizable army, estimated at 20,000 to 30,000 men. Contemporary accounts grimly suggest conditions were so dire that soldiers resorted to cannibalism, unable to spare their essential horses. The army thus faced a daunting march through hostile and potentially resistant Song territory, needing to maintain strength and numbers sufficient for subsequent combat against the Jin. Tolui's ability to maintain cohesion and morale through these extreme conditions attests to his exceptional leadership. Upon reaching the Song border in November 1231, he authorized a month-long period of raiding and pillaging across Sichuan province. This region, previously untouched by the two-decade conflict between Mongols and Jin, provided abundant resources, allowing Tolui's men to regain their strength, replenish their horses, and boost morale. This incursion also highlighted significant weaknesses in Song border defences, as Mongol forces penetrated nearly 290 kilometres into Song territory without substantial opposition. Despite prior brief clashes in 1227, during the Mongol destruction of the Tangut kingdom, the Song chief minister, Shimi Yuan, who held considerable influence since 1208, remained cautious, preferring to avoid provoking a full-scale war with the Mongols. Consequently, Tolui entered Jin-held Henan province, unopposed in January 1232. The Jin leadership, now desperate, urgently recalled generals Pua and Hada, withdrawing the garrison from Tongguan to intercept Tolui's advancing forces. At Sanfeng Mountain, Tolui and Subutai found themselves encircled by converging Jin armies led by these experienced commanders. According to Rashid al-Din, the Ilkhanid historian, Pua provocatively threatened to do this and that to their womenfolk, a clear implication of violence against Mongol women. The actual wording was undoubtedly harsher and deeply offensive, provoking Tolui's fury. Trapped and facing imminent battle, Mongol fortunes suddenly improved with the onset of a fierce snowstorm, accompanied by hail. Subutai astutely reminded Tolui that their forces, accustomed to harsh steppe winters, possessed a crucial advantage over their urban and village-dwelling adversaries. The Mongols, well prepared with heavy winter gear, patiently waited out the storm on horseback. Conversely, Jin forces suffered severely, ill-equipped for such harsh conditions in early February. After 4 days, Determining that their opponents were sufficiently weakened by exposure, Tolui ordered an aggressive charge down the mountainside. The Mongols rapidly descended upon the Jin troops, decisively defeating them and capturing both Pua and Hada. In brutal retaliation for the earlier threats against Mongol women, historical accounts claim the Mongols subjected the captured Jin soldiers to sexual humiliation and created an enormous mound of severed ears as a grim monument to their victory. The defeat at Sanfeng Mountain and the capture of their best generals signalled the end of the Jin Dynasty's ability to wage effective offensives. Ögedei breached the northern defences and soon reunited with his brother Tolui. After this consolidation, Subutai was entrusted with overall command of the military operations, while Ögedei and Tolui returned to Mongolia, possibly due to Ögedei falling seriously ill. In April 1232, Subutai initiated the siege of Kaifeng, encircling the city in a siege that gradually tightened over nearly a year. Precisely what occurred during Ögedei and Tolui's return to Mongolia remains uncertain, but by the end of 1232, Tolui had died. According to the official narrative found in the secret history of the Mongols, Ögedei became gravely ill, prompting Tolui to offer himself as a spiritual sacrifice in his brother's place. This account portrays Tolui heroically sacrificing himself to save Ögedei. However, references to Tolui consuming a special brew have fueled speculation among historians that Ögedei may have poisoned his brother. This theory, however, largely depends on the later political rivalry between the descendants of Ögedei and Tolui, and contemporary accounts generally depict the brothers as exceptionally close. Some scholars argue that Tolui's sons may have later altered the narrative in the secret history to cast their father in a more favourable light and vilify Ögedei, thus legitimising their eventual claim to leadership. Other chroniclers, like Giovanni, suggest Tolui simply drank himself to death, a plausible scenario considering similar fates befell Ögedei and several other Mongol nobles. Regardless, Tolui's passing deeply affected Ögedei, who never fully recovered from losing his closest companion. Meanwhile, at Kaifeng, Subutai conducted a relentless and brutal siege. The city, overwhelmed by refugees, swelled to a population exceeding 1 million and faced total blockade, leading to widespread starvation and disease throughout the summer of 1232. Both Mongol and Jin forces utilised gunpowder weapons during the siege, including bombs propelled by catapults. The Jin defenders employed fire lances, primitive flamethrowers capable of projecting flames up to 3 meters, effectively repelling Mongol assaults on breached city walls. Subutai employed various tactics to penetrate Kaifeng's formidable defences, including sappers who advanced under protective mobile shelters to dig tunnels beneath the walls. Jin defenders successfully countered these efforts by dropping explosive bombs onto the attackers, destroying both the shelters and their occupants. Additionally, strategic breaches of the dikes along the Yellow River flooded the surrounding plains and parts of the city, further complicating siege operations. Despite this courageous resistance, the Jin administration was deeply fragmented. Internal chaos saw commanders swiftly promoted, only to be rapidly demoted or executed for alleged disloyalty or minor offences. By February 1233, Emperor Aizong of Jin fled the city with a small group of loyal soldiers, abandoning Kaifeng to its fate. Quili, one of the commanders left behind, assassinated officers still loyal to Aizong, consolidating power for himself. Recognising that the only way to spare the city's population from complete annihilation was through voluntary surrender, Quili opened Kaifeng's gates to Subutai on May 29, 1233. Ögedei, influenced by the advice of his trusted advisor Yelu Chukai, ordered Subutai to show restraint. As a result, the Mongols limited their violence primarily to plundering, although approximately 500 members of the Jin royal Wanyan clan were executed. Shortly after the city's surrender, Quili was assassinated by another Jin officer in retaliation for a personal offence involving the officer's wife. By August 1233, Emperor Aizong and his dwindling entourage had retreated to Caizhou, just 64 kilometers from the border with the southern Song dynasty. Aizong's urgent pleas to the Song dynasty, warning them they would be the next target of Mongol aggression, were ignored. Instead, the Song dynasty chose cooperation with the Mongols against their longtime Jin rivals, sealing off any possible escape routes for Aizong. By November 1233, a Song military contingent joined Subutai's forces at Caizhou. The city endured severe starvation, yet the defenders resisted fiercely, inflicting significant casualties on the besiegers. Nevertheless, the outcome was now inevitable. As the joint Mongol-Song forces advanced toward Caizhou in early 1234, they faced a strategic obstacle. A nearby lake blocked direct access to the city. Ingeniously, they filled this lake with bundles of reeds and sticks, effectively creating a path for their siege forces. Inside Caizhou, the Jin Emperor Aizong, determined not to be remembered as the dynasty's final ruler, made a symbolic gesture by abdicating in favour of a distant relative he believed might escape and carry on resistance. Shortly after his abdication, Aizong took his own life by hanging. However, his desperate hopes were dashed almost immediately. Mongol forces breached the city's defences on February 9th, 1234. The newly enthroned Jin Emperor was killed in combat alongside his troops, having reigned only a few hours. This dramatic end marked the collapse of the Jurchen Jin Dynasty, which had ruled northern China for just over a century. Despite numerous military setbacks, defections, and losses, the Jurchen and their Chinese subjects demonstrated remarkable loyalty until the very end. Rarely had any kingdom resisted the full brunt of Mongol conquest so fiercely as the Jin. Interestingly, 4 centuries later, the Manchus, descendants of the Jurchen, would rise to rule both China and Mongolia, though that is a story for another time. Following the Jin dynasty's fall, the Mongol-Song brief alliance swiftly unravelled. Subutai withdrew his forces northward, eager to deliberate future campaigns. Meng Gong, the Song commander, also retreated due to the severe devastation of Henan province, which made provisioning his troops impossible. Aside from isolated locations, most of the region, including Kaifeng, remained under Mongol control. Kaifeng had significant historical resonance for the Song, having previously served as their capital until its capture by the Jin. Within Song ranks, there had long been pressure to reclaim lost northern territories. However, the influential chief councillor Shimi Yuan had effectively restrained these aggressive factions during his lengthy tenure. His death in late 1233 created a political void, one that the weak emperor Lizong of Song could not effectively manage. While Song commanders with direct experience against the Mongols understood the futility and danger of northern campaigns, many other generals, emboldened by victories against the Redcoats and uninvolved in the siege of Caizhou, clamoured enthusiastically for war upon hearing of the Jin's collapse. In the summer of 1234, 2 Song armies confidently marched into Henan, mistakenly believing that the local Chinese population would readily rise up in support and supply their troops. They captured Kaifeng and Luoyang, the birthplace of the Song dynasty's founder, without resistance, only to discover an exhausted and starving populace, barely able to sustain themselves, much less an invading army. Having only brought 2 weeks' worth of supplies in anticipation of a supportive local population, the Song forces soon refused to advance further and began a hasty retreat. Their withdrawal coincided disastrously with the return of Mongol forces tasked with responding to this invasion. At Luoyang, Mongol forces ambushed the retreating Song troops, inflicting devastating casualties. This brief and ill-conceived campaign, lasting scarcely a month, marked the beginning of a prolonged conflict that would eventually lead to the collapse of the southern Song dynasty itself, a war that endured for the next 4 decades. Throughout the remainder of Ögedei Khan's reign, sporadic and inconclusive warfare persisted between the Mongols and Song. Much of the Mongol military strength freed by the fall of the Jin was redirected westward for further expansion. This ongoing conflict claimed the life of one of Ögedei's sons and his chosen heir, Kochu, in 1236, a loss that deeply impacted Ögedei personally. Following Kochu's death, Ögedei increasingly succumbed to alcoholism, withdrawing from active governance even as his forces, under Subutai's capable command, continued to expand aggressively into Europe. We will delve deeper into these developments during Ögedei's reign in future episodes. Next time, our focus will shift westward to explore the continued Mongol campaigns in the Middle East during the 1230s, led by the formidable General Chormakun Noyan against the Khwarezmian prince Jalal al-Din Mingburnu. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the History of the Mongols. If you like the content and want to continue to support the series, would you please take a moment of your time to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from. Thank you, and see you all next time.